Discord. All right. So let's go over last week's lab, sorting hats. Sorting hats. That's what we named our file. I need to pull up the actual lab too, just so we can work through that. So there were a few questions in the Discord about, I did it this way. Is that okay? I try very hard in my labs to not like lay out a specific do it this way. Sometimes I have to just to, test you guys on the thing you guys learned. There are certain things that if I was doing it on my own, I wouldn't do it a certain way, but I have you guys do that just so you get the practice. This is one of those instances where, yeah, there are other ways of doing this than converting the input to a Boolean, but because it specifically says so in the lab sheet, you have to do it. That's always my one thing. Whenever you guys are turning in assignments, I understand that there's multiple ways to do anything in software, but if the instructions specify a certain thing, I want you guys to do that. You guys will lose points if you don't do it that way. So I just want to give that disclaimer. All right, so let's start things up. Public static void main string args. We got our main method over here. And we also need to get the scanner in here. Import Java util scanner. I submitted a duplicate file of the corrected pre-lab file. I got marked off since. So be very careful not to do that. The reason is if your Java file name is different from your class name, then okay, so let's say this, I sent a copy of this and it says sorting hat copy.java. Because the class name is not sorting hat copy, it's gonna have a compilation error. So if I were to change the name of this copy, I get an error, right? It says the file name and class name need to match. So don't submit me copies. You can submit me the original file. You're not going to lose it on your computer if you send me the original. But it's technically a compilation error, which means you would get half credit off. This time around, I'm not going to do that, but just know that in the future, I will be very anal about that. If you send me a file that for whatever reason, however simple the error is, if it doesn't work and it doesn't run, you're losing half points. Anyways.
I can actually submit the original file right now then if that is
well,
preferred.
That's a late, yeah, I mean, that's a late submission. It's up to you. Like I said, I'm not going to take points off this time, but in the future I will.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know.
Mm-hmm. So first things first, by the way, a cool little thing, if you put a star here, you get access to the entire Java util library. Or you can call the specific things as you need them. I'm normally lazy, so I always just do the star, so I load everything from the library. But there will be times where you don't want to do this because that just allocates extra memory that you don't want to allocate. But we're not really concerned about that at this level. So we want to ask the user 6 questions. I'm just going to go ahead and write those out. Do you consider yourself brave? Are you the class clown? Are you competitive? Are you a good learner? You tend to be a leader. Okay. I'm going to create several Boolean variables as well. And so some of you might do something like Boolean A, Boolean B. A shortcut to that is you can declare multiple Booleans. You can declare multiple variables of the same type, like what I'm about to do here. Is brave, is class clown, is competitive. You see I'm putting a comma in between each. That's just telling that's just a shortcut from having line by line by line by line of the same type of variable. Is good learner, is loves family, is leader. And the reason I'm naming it like this, is brave, is etc., is that's kind of the convention that's taken for Boolean variables. Because this kind of just lets you know that when you're reading it later in the code, when it just comes up as a variable and you're not sure what type of variable it is, the name of the variable is very important to prevent the reader from scrolling back through your code. Because when you're reading code for the first time, you don't want to jump back and forth and like figure out what is this variable, what does it do. It's very important that you name it clearly in a way that makes it easy to understand what it's doing. So that is the name. That is the reason for these names. So we should also need to initialize our scanner. And remember, with this, the variable name doesn't matter. I just prefer to name my scanners SC. When I have objects like this, I just prefer to name it the object. You could always name, you can also name it input. That's a valid name because technically this is the input stream. But we're going to do that for now. So what I'm going to do here is brave. I'm going to do it all in one line because that's how I write Java. It's probably going to be confusing, and I'll have like comments below it where I break it down into several lines to help explain to you guys what's going on. But again, if at any point you're confused about what I'm writing, because I am writing this in the style that I would write, I don't expect you guys to write in this style. This is just my way of coding. But yeah, just follow along best you can. And if you have questions, stop me and I'll answer. So is brave. We need to get a Boolean for this, right? So if we say is brave, can I do this in one line? No, we gotta do it in 2 lines. String input is equal to, actually, just for clarity's sake, I'm gonna string input. Input equals sc.next line is brave equals input equals ignore case, yes, or y. So what did I just do here? This right here, as we all know, because of the or, this is a logical statement. I mean, this just on its own would have been a logical statement, but because we're looking to see, as per the instructions, we're looking if it's a yes or a y, meaning if either of these things are true, this whole thing is going to be true. So what happens if the user gives us gobbledygook? What is the value of is brave going to be? What if the user gives us something like a typo, like on or a's, right? Like if they make a typo, what's going to happen? Yeah, it's going to be false. Exactly. As per the instructions, we only have to consider the true case. I threw this in here just to throw you guys off a little bit. If you look specifically for yes or no words, those are okay. But yeah. All right. And we go on. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this whole thing. Actually, we'll just copy it like this because that's basically going to repeat for all these questions. And then this one is class clown. Is competitive. Is good learner. Everybody following along so far, by the way? Did I lose anybody? And it's okay if you're lost. Ask questions. Because then if you don't ask questions, you're not going to learn.
Would it be simpler to make this into a method because you're repeating it?
So that's a good question. If you repeat stuff, you use a loop, usually, is repeated code. The reason why we can't use loops here is because every time we're asking a different question. Like if we wanted to do this in like a loop, we'd have to initialize an array with these different questions and these preset variables. And at that point, is it really that much more efficient than just doing it like this, right? Good eye that it is repetitive code and that you can try to do stuff to condense it. But right now, there's not really anything to condense. What does another string in the equals case mean? This is just something from Java. So if we look at the initialization, this is the actual equals ignore case method. So what's happening is the another string is the parameter name given in this method. So IntelliJ does this really neat thing where this little gray box comes up where if you're calling a method, this gray box will come up and tell you, hey, this is the name of the parameter for this one. And we'll get more to that as we come into methods, but that another string doesn't actually mean anything. It's just a label from IntelliJ for us. It's not actually in the code. Equals ignore case. So equals ignore case is a subset of the equals method. The equals method from the string library, it just compares two strings. So the string on the left followed by a dot. So we're saying this string, check if it equals this other string. And the equals ignore case just does a case insensitively. We could accomplish the same thing by saying something like is brave equals input to uppercase equals yes. This would be another way that we could do the same exact thing. But because there's already an ignore case method, we're just going to use that. Does that answer you guys' questions? Gabriella and Zilong? Okay. And if you're ever confused about what a method does, you can always look it up. So we go to string equals Java on Google. W3 Schools is great because it does a really good job of very simply explaining what it does. The equals method compares two strings and returns true if the strings are equal and false if not. But yeah, like Jamie said, Kevin, you can do things multiple ways. My way, just because like I'm showing this as the solution, it's not the solution. I'm not going to look if you did exactly this and mark you off if you didn't. There's multiple ways to do the same thing. There's multiple ways to come to the same outcome. Some ways are better than others in certain circumstances, and in those circumstances, I will mark in your code, which is kind of the reason I want you guys to start using GitHub, and we'll go over that today. I want you to get you guys warmed up to start using GitHub, because in GitHub, I can put comments inside of your code. That doesn't affect your actual file. It's a very nice interface that they have that allows me to leave comments and suggestions for your code directly inside of the code. It makes it easier for you to understand, and it makes it easier for me to communicate what I want from you. But anyways, let's move on. So right now we've accomplished steps 1 and 2. We've got all our Booleans and we've got the user input. So now we just have to display the output. So if someone is brave and puts family above all else or tends to be a leader, then they are Gryffindor. So if, and someone asked what the order for this was, and I answered it in the Discord. I will show you guys how to use this GitHub. We'll get to that in a bit, Paris. So if is loves family, put that in parentheses, and if they love the family and they're brave, or is leader, and we say you are a Gryffindor. Else if someone is not the class clown, is class clown, and is competitive, and we'll just copy this, or Slytherin. Else if someone is a good learner or competitive and are not brave or the leader, so if they is good learner or is competitive, someone's a good learner or competitive, and is brave, and not is leader, then they are Ravenclaw. Oops. Ravenclaw. Else if someone is the class clown and is not brave, if is class clown and is not brave and does not tend to be the leader and is leader, they are, oops, what happened here? Hufflepuff. Alrighty, so we got the 4 houses, and that should be the end of the program. So let's go ahead and give it a quick run. Is there a way to delete all of these at once? Awesome. Application. Sorting hats. Okay. And if we go ahead and move these down, and if we run this, you consider yourself brave. Let's try to aim for a specific house. Let's say we'll go for Slytherin just because it's easy, okay? So yes, this one doesn't matter. No, we are not the class clown. Are you competitive? Yes. No, no, no. Yeah, you're Slytherin. There we go. Perfect. So yeah, that is the Sorting Hat Lab. Now, let's talk about GitHub. So,
sir, really quick.
Yes.
Is there a feature on IntelliJ where if you screw something up that you can go back to the previous state that the code was in, just like in a Word doc?
No. Oh,
no.
Are you talking about Control Z?
Control Z.
Control Z. So, like for example,
There is
in
an
a Word
undo.
doc,
Like on Word, when you press Control Z to undo, that is, yeah, there's that.
Control Z. All right. Thank you both of you.
Mm-hmm. Can I go over the debugger lab? Sure. New class. And what did I call it? The debugging practice. Debugging practice. There we go. Okay. So the idea of the debugging practice is to get you guys in touch with using the debugger. I'm going to go ahead and edit configurations, add a new one. Templates. Okay, I screwed up. Application. Apply. Debugging practice. Okay. So the way you use the debugger is you just put a breakpoint somewhere in the code. So, okay, let's back up. What does the debugger do? Does anybody know what the debugger tool in IntelliJ does?
It lets you step through the code.
Correct. So the way you do that is you mark a place in the code where you want the execution to stop, and then you want to be given manual control over execution of the code. It allows you to step through the code as the computer would, so you see what's happening. What we're going to do, so let's start with this one. How many layers in a pyramid do you want? 4. So this is like what the expected output should be. This is what it should look like. So here's the print statement. How many levels in your pyramid? And then let's just see what happens when we run this, just so we can see where the problems lie. That's what I like to do personally when I'm debugging code, is I run it first and I just try to identify where the issues are happening. How many layers in your pyramid do you want? 4. Whoa, we are stuck in an endless loop. So we say stop, because there's a problem here. It's not only is it printing it in one layer, but it is going on literally forever until the CPU would time it out. Kill the process because it's stuck in an infinite loop. All right, so let's take a look. And this one should be a little bit easier, just because. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and just put the breakpoint here, because I can probably solve it without using the debugger, but it's good practice. So I just clicked right here in the left, and this little red bar appeared. This means that there's a breakpoint at this line. When we arrive at this line, the code is when we run it with a debugger and we arrive at this line, that IntelliJ is going to give me control over when to step. So I click the debugger, and this I have to do some rearranging of my panels to get it this way. You guys will your panels won't look like this by default, but you can click and drag windows around to try and get the split screen. I like it this way because here on the right hand side I can see what prints, and on the left hand side it's going to have all my variables and stuff. So I want 4 layers in my pyramid. Okay, so levels equals 4. That looks okay. While int I equals 0, and I is less than or equal to levels, I plus plus. Okay, so for this outer loop is going to be each row, each level. And then in this next one, we want it to print out a certain amount. So basically what we wanted to do here is print out a dot for every whatever the layer number is. So if this was the first level where I is 0, then this should print out 1 dot. If it's the next level where I equals 2, it should print out 2 dots, and so on and so forth. Right now, here's the problem. I minus 1 while j is greater than 0. Well, this at a certain point is never going to be true. We're not going to meet this. So we already know that this is wrong because we want it to be whatever the row is, we want to do that much plus 1. So, I mean, we can keep stepping through this. This is going to be using the old code. Yep, there we go. So basically, once when it gets to I equals 2, it looks like we're just stuck here forever. Because we're going for while j is greater than 0. That's basically going to be forever, right? So first, this was wrong. The initialization of j was wrong. And then the end condition. That's usually how you can tell. If your loop just runs on forever, you'll know almost immediately there's probably some issue with the condition that you've set. Now, whether that be because you initialized your iterator wrong, or because the condition is just not reachable, it depends on the context. You have to read and see. But usually, if your loop just runs on forever or does behaves in a way you don't expect, usually the answer starts here. Usually, not always. So while j is greater than 0, well, that's always going to be true, right? Anytime with the old initialization where j was equal to I minus 1, that was always going to be true. So here's what we'll do. Instead of initializing j, we'll initialize j to 0. And while j is less than, we'll just say I plus 1. So let's give that a try. I think that should work. Yeah, because we're always printing out a number of dots that is equal to whatever row we are plus 1. And bam, we got the output exact. Oh wait, no we didn't, because we have an extra row here. Who can tell me, where do I need to look? We know that we printed an extra row. Which of the loops do I need to look at to fix this? Which of the 2 loops is responsible for controlling the number of rows?
The outer loop.
Correct. And what's wrong in the outer loop?
The outer loop is the levels, right? The levels you put for start with 0. Not less and equal, should be less, only less.
Correct. And if we run it again, 4. Perfect. So we come here.
Really quick, sir.
Yes.
Is this the correct way to do it, or can there be multiple ways of debugging this? Because I did it another way, and it still worked fine.
So if you were only testing for the number 4 for the rows, then it might be incorrect because you might have just made the code work for just that instance. I'm not going to test it for just 4. I'm going to test it for multiple things. This was just an example output. You should always test your code for multiple cases.
Oh no, I tested it for multiple cases.
Okay.
And it still worked somehow.
I'll have
I know how it works, but it just worked.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look at your code and I can look. Yeah, those of you who did it differently, if it works, it works. I'll take a look at your code and I'll leave comments on it. If I think that maybe you should have done it a different way, I'll let you know, but it might also be fine. So for this one, we want to spell our name backwards and in all capitals. Okay. Well, as soon as we get here, it doesn't ask us, it asks us for the name, but it skips forward. Hold on, we've encountered this before. How do we fix that? How do we make it so it actually asks us for the next line?
So I actually remember you gave us this specific example. I think it was on the first lab. We need to include a scanner.nextLine with a blank parentheses, because I remember you said something about like the catch, like it expects a certain like input and it'll continue to expect a certain input.
Right, exactly. Let me go to the whiteboard real quick just to illustrate that. So when we ask the user for input, for any input, like for instance, in our example, we asked them for a number, right? They said 4. And when they hit enter, this new line carriage character gets put into what's called the buffer. So this is our input buffer. This is something at the system level. And then when we call next line or next int, sc dot, well, I'll just call it ni for next int, it only reads up to any delimiter. Delimiter means something that like divides up the string, like a space, comma, whatever, or a new line. So it only reads up through the first integer that it finds. In this case, it encounters this character, which is like, oh, that's an integer. Okay, throw that into the buffer. Then it encounters this character and it goes, oh, whoa, that's not it. Leave that there. That's not an integer. So it just pulls out this. Scanner.nextLine reads up to and including the new line carriage. That's how it knows that it's read a new line. Well, when we invoke it, it doesn't matter what the user is going to give us, because as soon as we invoke it, it checks the buffer and it goes, whoa, there's a new line carriage right there. That's what I'm looking for. I'm good. And it bails out. So before we have the next line where we ask the user for their input, we need to clear it with an extra next line call. That's why that's there. That's why we use that. So right here, clears the input buffer. Alrighty, and then, so now let's see what happens when we run this, and then we'll go in with a debugger to take a closer look. What is your name, Turk? Oh, why didn't it print out? That's weird. Let's go take a look at what's happening. And then if you click this this one here, resume program, it'll resume the program up to the next break line. We'll just get rid of that for now. What is your name? Turk. Okay, so print a new line. That's fine. While int I is string dot length and I is less than 0, I minus minus. Okay, well, the condition is clearly wrong. Let's take a look at that. So we haven't really talked about indices yet because we haven't gotten to what do you call it? We haven't gotten to arrays, so you guys haven't really learned about indexing all that much. In computer science, we we number things starting from the number 0. So the indexes for the string Turk are 0, 1, 2, 3. There's 4 letters, so 3 is the max index. The max index is always length minus 1. So basically what we got to do here is start from 3 and work our way backwards. How do we do that? What should we initialize? If we want to start from the last index, what should I be initialized to? And I'll leave that here just so you guys can see. So if we want to read this thing backwards, it makes sense that we start from the last index.
It'd be length minus 1, right?
Right, exactly. That is what we initialize it to. And then what's the terminating condition? When do we stop?
More than equal to 0.
Correct. So now if we run this, perfect. And technically there should be a space, but that's not a big deal. We could actually just even do that here. And if we run it again, perfect. The output is exactly as we expected. And that's the debugging practice lab. Any questions on either of these two?
Can you go for the last part real quick again? How did you get the output? Just the last part.
So if I undo everything that I did, so because we number our, everything in computer science is numbered left to right, starting from 0. So there are this I is what's called an index. So if we want to read this string backwards, we need to start at the last index and work our way down to 0. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So the problem with that is here, if we look where we start, I string dot length, first of all, right off the bat, we know that length is not 0. We know that length is not less than 0. It can't be, right? So if the condition is I is less than 0, it's nothing in this if state, nothing inside this for loop is ever going to run, right? Because as soon as it checks this condition from where the I is initialized to, it's going to hop out. You follow me so far?
Right, right.
So we know for a fact that the problem is here. It has to start with here. So let's look at what we initialize. We started string.length. String.length is going to be what number for the string Turk? How many letters are in Turk?
4.
And so what's string.length going to be?
So 4.
Right. And how do we, what's the last index of anything going to be ever?
4.
Mm-mm.
3.
Right. Well, what I was going for is the last index, the max index for anything is its length minus 1.
Right.
So we got that part right. We're starting at the last index. Now we need to fix this because we're basically going from the last index to index 0, right?
Right.
So how do we fix that here?
So is bigger equal than 0.
Correct, greater than or equal to 0. And this part is okay because we do want to decrement. And then over here, I just, it didn't have a space initially, and I just put a space there like that. I just, because it's a string, here's the character, and then we're going to append to the string a space.
Got
it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about loops. And I'm guessing you guys are on methods this week and loops was last week? Or are you on arrays this week?
We're on methods.
Okay, cool. Cool, so that's what we talked about last week. So what are the 3 different kinds of loops? Can anyone tell me? Or like, we'll say 2.5. What are the, yeah, there's the for loop. While, there's one more. If else is not a loop. If else are conditional statements. Yes, the do while loop. Now, people often get confused between the while and the do while, and it can be kind of confusing, but there's a very easy way to differentiate them. So let's start with the for loop. How do we structure a for loop? We start with the word for, obviously. Then what goes in here? What's the first thing that we have in a for loop?
Initializing of your count variable.
Yeah, init counter, I'll call it. Then what's next?
Then you have your logical check, pretty much like greater than, less than your counter versus a
There's
set
a very
value.
specific name I'm looking for in there.
Okay.
Condition?
Yes, the condition. The reason I'm looking for that specific name is because, yes, it is a Boolean, but it's more specific than that. It's the condition that how long you're going to do this loop until. And then what's the last part?
Your increment.
Yeah, or more specifically your step, because you might be decrementing, or you might be incrementing by 2. You might be incrementing by -1. So it's your step. How do we do a while loop? What are the parts of a while loop? And here's the body. We have while, obviously, and then what?
We have a condition.
Yeah, and that's it. That's all that a while loop is. Fun fact, some languages don't have if statements. Some really old ones don't have if statements. So what you do instead, you use a while loop. So you'll say like while a equals 3. And then if your a is equal to 3, you'll do your stuff here. And then at the end, you'll just break out of it. We'll get to the words like break and continue in a little bit, but how do we do a do while loop? What's the format for a do while loop?
You put do at the top, then you start your curly braces. Yeah. Then you put while at the end with a semicolon at the end of the parentheses.
Correct. Who can tell me the difference between a while loop and a do while loop? And the syntax kind of gives away the difference as well, if you like. Really
do while loop is like whatever the condition, you have to exit it once. It has to execute the condition once.
Close. It's mostly your terms you're mixing up. You execute the body once. You always execute the body, and then you check the condition. In a while loop, you check the condition, then you execute the body. So these two things, that's how they're different. You can change the conditions around so that these things are semantically, they can be the same thing semantically. But if you write a condition where you expect for your thing to check it, then do it, and you use a do while loop for it, then you're going to get an extra run. So just know that do while does the thing, then it checks the condition and keeps going if it can. Whereas a while loop will check the condition and then execute the code. So it's just, they're the same, but they're just flipped backwards. There's a few keywords to be aware of. Break and continue. What does the break keyword do? Yes, that is correct, Mohammed. Do does the action before you check the conditional. What does the break keyword do? Yeah, it breaks you out of the loop. Let's say I have 2 loops. Let's say I have a while, we'll call this loop A. I have another while in here. Loop B. And just for kicks, we'll have a third one, while loop C. And I have a break statement here. What is the break statement? Which loop is the break statement going to break out of? Is it going to break out of all of them? Out of A, B, or C?
A. No, this one break all of them.
No, Mohammed's correct. It breaks out of B. If we wanted a break statement, like one break statement will never break you out of all of your loops. I mean, like let's just assume there was like a body, I guess, here. Let's assume like the rest of the loop A had stuff to do here. I guess it was kind of a bad written example, but yeah. Semantically, this breaks you out of this loop, right? And then, there might be other stuff here that happens with while loop A. Maybe the condition has us keep going. We never know. But that's what break does. What does continue do? What does the continue keyword do? Not quite, Mohammed. It does not skip to the next statement. The next statement would be like, this would be one statement and this would be another statement, right? The continue does not skip to the next statement. Not quite, Hamanta. You use the continue keyword inside of a loop. That's where you use it. Alex, you're close. The continue keyword goes to the next step of your loop. Now, for a while loop, that will just mean you repeat it, right? Because there's no automatic increment for the while loop. But for the for loop, it will increment it when it hits the continue keyword. So like, let's say we have for int I equals 0, I is less than 29. This is just a random number. And I say if I modulo 2 is 0, this is basically checking if I is even. And I'll kind of break this down in a little more detail here in just a second. Continue, otherwise we just print out I is odd, right? So when I is equal to 0, this condition is true, and then we continue. And then we get into I is equal to 1. This condition is not true, and then this prints. And when we're at I equals 2, we skip it, and then we come to I equals 3, yada, yada, yada. You guys get the idea. So this I divided by 2 is equal to 0. The way modulo works, modulo operator. What does the modulo operator give us? So if I have 6 modulo 3, what is the output going to be? Yeah, it's going to be 0. Because what the modulo operator does is it divides the two integers, and if there is a remainder, it gives you the remainder. And if there is no remainder, it gives 0. So the modulo operator does that. Division operator gives us 2. So this means that 2, it's like first grade all over again, right? 3 goes into 6 2 times, and there's no remainder. If we had, say, 4, this would give us 1, and the modulo would give us 2. Because 4 goes into 6 one time, and then there's 2 left over. It's that simple. You start using modulo versus division a lot, especially when we come to arrays, being able to easily parse through 2-dimensional arrays, because there's a lot of neat little tricks you can do with converting a 2-dimensional array index to a 1-dimensional array index, and a lot of other neat little stuff. There's going to be a lot of times where you're going to be using modulo and conditional stuff and just playing tricks. That's why it's really, really important to get used to math. Hamanta, the enhanced for loop I'm going to get to when we get to arrays, because an enhanced for loop doesn't make much sense outside of using collections, and we haven't covered that in the class yet. So once when we get into talking about arrays is when we'll talk about the enhanced for loop. Okay, so let's talk GitHub, right? Let's talk about GitHub. And I'll just go ahead and clear all this for the next class. Oh, nice. The old one was still copied in my thing, my clipboard. Cool. All right, GitHub. To use GitHub, you'll need to go to github.com, and you're going to need to make yourself an account. So I'll open it up in an incognito window so you guys can see what happens when you come in and you're not signed in. You'll have to sign up or sign in if you have an account already. Once when you've made an account, you'll basically be at this screen. It's going to ask you to make repositories. For now, I'm not going to have you guys use GitHub this week. We'll probably start using it next week because I need to look at this sub feature in GitHub called GitHub Classroom that allows me to make collective repositories for all of us. But the way GitHub works is it is a place that it is a remote location that allows you to store code from your local machine. So what does that mean? Let's say I write a project. How to do this? Back here. Let's say CD desktop. Cool. 211. Make directory. GitHub demo. Okay. I want to. Let's say I have some code here. I'm just going to do vi hello world.java. I'm going to say public class hello world. Public static void main string args system out println hello world. All right. And I don't care about the typo right now. So I made a new file. I made a new Java file in this, oops, hello world.java into GitHub demo. So in my GitHub demo folder, I have this file called hello world.java. I want to put this up to GitHub, meaning my code will be available in GitHub for whoever I choose to see. How to put code to new repo GitHub. I always forget how. So I'm going to create a new repository on GitHub. This is where my code is going to go to. I'm going to call this GitHub demo. A demo of how to use GitHub for CSC 211. I'm just going to make it private. You know what? Actually, we're going to do this the other way around. rm git. And don't worry too much about the Linux commands that I'm using here in the terminal. You guys don't need to know all this stuff. I'm just doing it to work through it quickly. I'm going to create a new GitHub repository. And GitHub templates, just say Java. You don't need to ignore that, add that stuff as well. I'm just putting it in just because. So I've created a new empty repository on GitHub, and I want to put it in my local. So we'll say I'll copy that to my local. You can also use an app called GitHub Desktop. I don't like using it. If you guys want to use it, that's totally fine. But I will say the one thing about the GitHub interface. Most professional places that I know of don't use that. There's a lot of limitations in that prevent you from doing certain things that you could do otherwise in what's called the CLI, your command line interface. I'm going to clear this real quick. When you're using your command line terminal, you have a lot of control over what happens as long as you know the commands and kind of are familiar with it. The GitHub stuff that I'm going to have you guys do is so simple, you don't even need the, I mean, you can use the GUI, the graphical interface, because it might just be more user-friendly. But honestly, I think it's better for you guys to start building these skills now because this is such fundamental stuff for software development. Being able to use your command line interface is such a basic skill for all software engineers to have that I don't think there's much of a reason to not just start practicing. If you have any questions, you can always ask in the Discord. There's bound to be myself or like other people who know how to do this stuff that can help you out. But all I ask is that you try, right? It's better that you try and just learn from not being able to do. Eventually, like you'll just learn how to do it. And it's gonna suck for a while, but I'm not gonna rail your ass about the GitHub stuff. I'm not gonna dock you off a bunch of points because you couldn't do GitHub. I'll give you chances to like do late submissions and whatnot without any penalty until you guys get the stuff. If it's legitimately like, I just couldn't figure out how to use GitHub issue, I'll work with you on that. That's okay. But I think it's going to be more helpful in the long run if you guys, for yourselves as software engineers and for me to be able to give you better input on your code. because now I can, from GitHub, I can run your code in GitHub. I can test your code. I can set up test cases so that when you guys are submitting an assignment, I can set up a test run for your code. There's a lot of really cool stuff for that in GitHub. And if it doesn't pass, you'll know that what kind of score you're going to get, right? So let's get into it. I'm going to say git clone. So first of all, I'm going to go to the folder. By default, your terminal will start in this, in your users, and whatever your username is, this directory. And your terminal might not look like this because I've customized mine. But the way you can see, well, I posted a tutorial set up GitHub. There's a lot of tutorials for that online. This is going to be one of the times where I'm going to say Google it, because there's so many videos online of showing you how to do it. You don't need me demoing it outside of what I'm doing right now. I'm not going to put extra effort towards tutorials for GitHub because so much of that stuff already exists. I encourage you guys to go out, explore on your own. If you explore on your own and you don't get it and you're confused, definitely ping me on Discord. By the way, if you have questions about stuff, please use the Homework Help Discord channel. Don't just DM me. I'm not going to answer your DMs because I'm just going to tell you, ask it in the Homework Help channel, because someone else probably has the same question you do. And it's better to just answer in a public place like that than answer the same DM like 6 different times. Anyways, back to this. You'll always know where you are in your terminal, what path. If you say PWD, it'll print out your path. PWD stands for path of the working directory, but that doesn't matter. So you'll say cd change directory to your desktop. And I'm just going to make a new folder on my desktop, mkdir, or we'll just put my GitHub repo straight on my desktop. So we'll say git clone that. And for Git, I don't think you have to set up anything for your terminal, but you might, and it'll tell you what to do if that's the case. Or it'll usually direct you, or you can find a tutorial online that'll tell you how to do it. For Windows users, I strongly recommend the GitHub CLI. This terminal Windows. Is it this one? No, it's not that.
So would you say that it would be better to use PowerShell or command line on Windows?
Windows, there's a specific GitHub CLI that I use that I like. There's also another one, Windows Commander. This is another one that I really, really like, this console emulator. It's a Linux console emulator. It's great for Windows. This and the GitHub one are usually what I use because it emulates Linux environment in Windows, which is, I really, really like that. I really don't like the Windows PowerShell. I don't like the Windows command line terminal.
Okay. So that just emulates all of the Linux commands to run on Windows, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So if I do an ls-la on my desktop again, we see right here, GitHub demo, cd GitHub demo. And in here, we've got the readme .markdown and the git ignore, right? All the stuff from my GitHub terminal. Now what I can do, so what I have created now is a link between my local machine, everything right here, and if I go to my desktop, you guys will see it. GitHub demo, right here, right? There it is, the readme.md. We don't see the .gitignore file because if you put a dot before file in your file system, it means that it's a hidden file, which again is the benefit of using your command line terminal. You can see hidden files. Close those. Anyways, back at the GitHub demo. I've got these files here, right? Let's say I want to make changes to the readme.md file, vi readme.md, okay? And over here I put, this is my first commit. So I made a change to this file, and it's reflected locally because I've changed the local file. But if I refresh my GitHub, it doesn't show the new line that I put in. So what I need to do is I need to push those changes to GitHub. The way I do that is I say git add, and I say the files that I want to add if I want to add everything, I just go to like the home directory, the outermost directory of the GitHub project, and say git add dot. That'll add everything. And then I say git commit -m, and then this is my first commit. Basically, I'm preparing a commit to GitHub with a message. A commit is a series of changes. It's a series of changed files. That way, when you go to your GitHub, you can look at your history of all the different changes, and on each change, which files were altered and what the changes to that file were. That way, you could reverse a commit. So the changes you put in from one commit, maybe you don't need those later, or maybe they turn out to be a problem and you take them out. That's why it's important to have good commit messages explaining what you did on each one. So we changed one file. There are 2 insertions. I inserted a space in a new line. And then I finally, so when you commit something, it's set aside locally as a staged change. And then when you say git push, it pushes your changes to the remote. So now if we come back here, bam, there we see it. This is my first commit. Git bash, I think that's the one I use. Give me a second, let me check. What is it that I use on my Windows machine? Yeah, it is git bash that I use. I like git bash a lot. That's actually, more than Commander lately, has been the terminal that I use on Windows, because usually if I'm working on my Windows machine, it's on a project from GitHub. So git bash makes it really easy. It has nice little things in there that tell me which branch I'm on for any given project. It's a lot of little nifty features. But anyways, we're not going to get into branching right now. Right now, all I really want you guys to know how to do is when you make changes to a code, push it to GitHub. And you can always change your commit. So if you go to your commits here, you got this. This is all your different commits. There should be a button somewhere in here where you should be able to reverse certain commits, or maybe it's your reverse pushes. I've never had to reverse a commit. I've had to reverse pull requests, but I've never had to reverse a commit. That'll be something to Google that I can look up and get back to you guys with later. Anyways, that aside. Oh, wait, that was the first commit. That was the initial commit. Let's look at this one. You can leave comments on the commit, or I can too as well with the GitHub Classroom. But this is essentially what GitHub is. GitHub is a way for you to put your code in an online repository where other people can come view it. And I can leave, there's a bunch of tools on here that allow me to put comments in your code, that allow me to mark things for changes, etc. It is really, really going to be helpful long-term for you guys. There's going to be growing pains in it, obviously, and I'm not going to have you guys use it this week, but I encourage you this week, practice putting the lab to GitHub. So the way I would recommend, there's 2 ways you could do it. You could have a folder locally, then create a repository, and then create a link locally between those 2 folders. Or before you start working on your project, create a new GitHub repository, clone it to your local, which is exactly what I did here. Create a new GitHub repository, clone it to your machine somewhere, and then start working on it from there. Either way works. It will require a fair amount of Googling on your part, but I will be there to help you guys out with it. So, and I'll actually even make a Discord channel, I'll do that later, make a Discord channel specifically for GitHub questions, or we could just use the GitHub survey. Here, I'll change, where is it? Where is it? There it is. I'll change this specifically. Oh, I did change it. GitHub discussion. Awesome. Yeah. So if you have GitHub specific questions, ask them in the GitHub discussion. That way, the homework help is for all your homework stuff, and then the GitHub discussion is for all the GitHub discussion stuff. Okay, that was GitHub. Very, very rough and broken down. Does everyone at least now understand what GitHub is, what it is used for, or do you guys have questions on like big picture, what is GitHub? I'm happy to answer anything I can. Is everybody sold on GitHub? Everybody understands what it is?
Yeah, I will definitely look into it. It's something new for me, though.
Yeah, it's really,
Other
really
than
good.
the minor frustration of having to use command line, it sounds like it's worthwhile.
I mean, you guys can use
exactly.
the desktop app, and like, if you're really just lost with the command line, go ahead and use the desktop app. I can't be as much help with the desktop app because I don't use it. And again, this is just from my perspective. I will say I have found that even, at my level as a senior, I have like very few classmates who still use it. It seems to be one of those things that once when you start using it, it's so hard to get weaned off of it. And you eventually do have to get weaned off of it. So I think it's easier to just, can I make a step-by-step instruction for the IntelliJ tutorial? What IntelliJ tutorial? How to use Git with IntelliJ?
Oh, because you know how like in the beginning you made like a step-by-step tutorial on how to use IntelliJ?
I just said I'm not going to do that for GitHub because there's so many that exist out there. You guys just have to search for it a little bit.
Oh, okay.
There's so many video tutorials that are better than anything I could scrounge up together. I mean, dude, how to use GitHub. There's so many different stuff on here. Just nice graphical stuff. I like freecodecamp.org. They make good stuff. Traversy Media does a really, really good job of explaining stuff. I would strongly recommend this channel for your GitHub tutorial. 30-minute video. He's going to go through literally everything you need to know. Maybe even like beyond certain details that you would have wanted beforehand. And he uses Windows too, so that could be helpful for you Windows guys. But yeah. For the command line, as long, if you guys are on Windows, the problem with Windows command line is it uses a Windows format, which is not standard. Most people use Linux style command lines, and Windows doesn't support that. So you have to install different software to kind of get around that a little bit. But if you use Git Bash or the Commander, CMDER, those two things, if you use those terminals, I really, really like them both. They're both really good Linux emulators for the Windows. Okay, let's talk about the lab for next week. Chapter 5 lab. This one should be fairly straightforward. You guys have to do the Fibonacci sequence, the Fibonacci series, I should say. For those of you who don't know what the Fibonacci series is, it starts with 0 and 1. Those are the first two numbers in the series, and you add the number previous to the current number. So, first number is 0, second number is 1. The third number is going to be 0 plus 1. The fourth number is going to be the previous number plus the one before it, right? And on we go, adding the two numbers previous to it to get the next one. So 5, it comes from the two numbers before it. 8 comes from adding the two numbers before it. 13 comes from 5 plus 8, and so on. For your specific Fibonacci series, you only ask for, you can only, for this assignment, the user input, you're going to cap it at 20. So if they give you a number greater than 20, you're going to repeatedly ask them to give you a number smaller than 20 until they give you the right one. So that's, doing things multiple times. That sounds like loops, right? There's a lot of hints and whatnot to help you guys in there with it. But yeah, this is the assignment. This is what it should look like. They ask you for Fibonacci series, and you enter the first 7 numbers of the Fibonacci series. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's the first 7 digits of the Fibonacci series. And you write up to 20. Any questions for the assignment? There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of good notes, a lot of good tips in there. Please do read it.
Yeah. I noticed that it says for that little input thing, no greater than 20. Do we actually have to like loop through that to make sure that the user actually adds a valid input?
Like I just said, yeah. You're going to keep prompting them with that. As long as they keep giving you bad input, you're going to ask them to give you right input.
Got it. Just double checking on that one because your screenshot has the exit code at the end, and I was like,
yeah, that screen, I didn't write the specific lab. It does that. I think that you guys should have it loop through because there's no reason that you can't do it with what you have in your arsenal right now.
Any thoughts on using methods to break some of the stuff out to make it just cleaner?
If you want to, go for it.
Okay.
I'm not going to mark you down for it. Now, if you use methods, but you use them wrong and it creates runtime errors or compilation errors, then you're going to get knocked points off.
Yeah.
But I have nothing against
That's
you guys
fair.
using, I have nothing against you guys practicing skills you learned in 210 this week. I encourage it.
Got it.
It could be, Essa. Oh, something I forgot to say about loops. I should have said this during the demo. Are you guys familiar with the difference between discrete and continuous? Have you heard these terms before?
Yes.
I've heard of these before. I've heard more. I heard discrete before, but oh wait, yeah, I heard continuous. I meant to say.
Yeah, you definitely heard continuous in calculus classes. Continuous means goes on forever. Discrete means there's a finite amount. With loops, for loops, you already have to know beforehand where you're starting and how many steps you're doing, right? That probably sounds more like a continuous, or sorry, a discrete relationship, right? Because we have a finite amount, a set amount of steps that we need to take that we know beforehand. Whereas if we think about a while loop, we're just doing it up until we meet a condition. We're doing some unknown thing until we meet a condition. So while loops are generally good for more continuous situations, for situations where there's an end goal, we know where the ending is, but we don't necessarily know what goes on in the middle. So for instance, when we're waiting on the user to give us the right input, which loop would we want to use? Do we want to use a for loop or a while loop, and why? So we're in a situation. Yeah, Alex, why would we use a while loop?
Because it's a continuous situation where you don't have a defined end.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. The user's actions and you checking for it within the body of the while loop is what's going to help decide, when the while loop ends. So that is correct. Yeah. That should be a big, big hint for how to do the what I asked, where you keep asking for input until the end here. And I'll go ahead and put up an announcement on the Discord just to remind you guys of that. Or I'll actually even put it up right here in iLearn. That way everyone can see it at its settings. And we'll make it big red so that everybody can see. Note: the demo shows the program ending after one input request from the user. For your submissions, you must error check the user's input until they give a valid one. And we'll go ahead and, how do I change the color of it? Red. There we go. Oh, the due date for lab 5? I do need to change the due date for lab 25. Thank you. March 5th. And then save and display. So I need to change the override for group override. Thanks for reminding me on that. Which means I have to go through and change it for a bunch of others as well. Alrighty. Any questions?
Anything we have to do for negative numbers, or is that just sort of?
That counts as a bad input as well. If they give you like a -3, that's obviously not correct. You can't count to -3.
Got it. Just double checking sort of my bounds on this. So.
Any other questions about anything covered today, anything for the lab? And like I said, today's lab, I'm not going to require it to be on GitHub, but I encourage you guys to practice it. I encourage you guys getting used to putting your projects up on GitHub. So definitely get some practice in. Practice what I showed today of creating a repository and then cloning it to your local and doing it the other way around, where you have a local repository already ready to go. and you want to put it to an empty remote repository. Practice both.
So what's our minimum safe value, 1 or 0?
Let's say 1, and you guys can hard code save somewhere where the first 2 numbers are. Actually, just to make it easier, make the minimum be 3, because the first 2 numbers are hard set.
That was kind of what I was concerned about. Is I was like, how the heck do I calculate it if I only have 1 digit?
Yeah, just do it. Just do it to 3, because you can do it, but it's a whole lot of if-else statements that's just going to be really annoying to code, and I would be annoyed if my teacher made me code that. I'm not going to make you code that either.
Okay.
So it should be
That's
between
good.
3 and 20 is your bounds.
That's great to know.
Yeah, no problem, Kevin. I encourage you guys to get practicing on GitHub now. The more practice you get under your belt, the better you're going to be in the future. Because it's such a basic, people, even at my senior level, people have struggled with GitHub. I've had classmates, I've had group project members who've nearly screwed over the entire project because their commit overwrote something. So, and it was literally just because of a problem with them using GitHub. They didn't know how to use GitHub. They didn't know how to merge changes, and they got all confused and screwed up a bunch of stuff. I've lost code because of dumb stuff like that. So yeah, the more practice you get now and you make those mistakes now earlier on, the better group partner you're going to be later. And just, yeah, I mean, a lot of companies, when you go to apply for jobs, GitHub should be just something. It's kind of like saying, I know how to use Word. Well, duh, everybody knows how to use Word, right? But yeah, that's that. That's class. If you guys have questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'm going to end the recording and close out.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.